Okay, picking up right where we left off in the previous video, we said that the soldier was going to start attacking the enemy castle and do damage to it. So for that to happen, we need to have the enemy castle to have HP. So that's just going to be a variable, but there's a couple ways you can go about this. You can either attach a script to the castle, or you can create a separate GM object, attach the script to that, and that way it makes it easier to manage several different functions together. So you're managing the overall game flow. So I'm going to take the latter approach because I think it's a good practice to get in the habit of. Not to mention that particularly in more complex games, you really don't have any choice other than to make an object that tracks all these different things that happen, like these timing events and things like that. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go up to game object, create empty, and we're going to call it GM. Now, just to be clear, calling it a GM object means nothing to Unity. That's just for the benefit of you, the developer, to know what you're using that object for. We're now going to right click, create C#. We'll call this game flow. We take our GM object, we put game flow onto it. And now we delete, because we don't need the remark statements. We already reviewed what those are. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a static variable. So public static int, and this will be called enemy castle HP, and we'll set it equal to, say, 100. Now, two important aspects to a static variable. One, it's accessible by any object anywhere in the game, anywhere in the application. The second thing to keep in mind is that it will only change if you expressly change its value. So, we now have our variable to track that there is HP. So, let's save that. And we go back to our scene. So now what we need to do is we need our soldier, when it attacks, it reduces that value. So that's why we made it a static variable. That way one object can affect a variable from another object. So we go back to our scripts, we go to melee con, and then what we do is this is when the object, the soldier object, has reached the castle, okay, because we set the velocity to 0. So we also want this to trigger an event. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a subroutine. So IEnumerator, and it's going to be melee attack rate with parentheses. What we're going to do is, I always forget to do it, so I'm going to do it now. Even before we've declared what this routine does, we're going to choose start coroutine, parenthesis, melee attack rate, parenthesis. I always forget to do that. I create the subroutine and then I don't actually reference it, so it sits there and does nothing. Because if you don't do this, this won't ever run. It's only running when you call it. All right, so the soldier has collided with the castle, it stops moving, and now this routine is going to run. What we're going to do is we put in a slight delay, so yield return new, wait 4 seconds, and let's do, say, 1 second. So it's going to have a 1 second attack rate. I usually like to explain everything. For now, this, you have to type it out, but really what you care about is this. You're saying with this line that after a 1 second delay, something's going to happen. So what's going to happen? Well, we said that for the moment, we're not going to show an attack animation, but we do need damage to occur to the enemy tower. So that variable will be, so first we have to reference where that variable is declared, so the game flow script, and then it was called enemy castle HP, there we go, minus equals, we'll say 5. It's doing 5 points of damage. And then what we do is this becomes, I believe the proper phrase is auto-recursive, and that is it will reference itself, because this comes back up here. This says start this coroutine again. Once again, there'll be a 1-second delay. So again, the logic is the soldier moves at the very beginning when it's instantiated. When it collides with an object that has a tag of enemy castle, it stops moving, and then this routine will be started. It says come down to this routine. Well, this routine says wait for 1 second, reduce this variable by 5, rinse and repeat. And so this will just keep happening. So now that actually is the basis of a unit doing damage to the enemy castle. Let's make sure this is happening. So debug.log, and what we're going to do, we're just going to take this variable and pop it in here. So the debug log shows up down here in the lower left corner. It's just going to print that value after an attack is performed. So we're not making any decisions yet. Again, it's just a variable that's floating out there until you actually make decisions like you increase the player's score, you load a new castle, whatever. So we haven't actually made any decisions based on it, but again, one step at a time. We need to create a variable and be able to modify that variable, and we need to be able to track that variable. So I click on him, he spawns. And see how this is changing down here? So he's not animated yet. Like I said, that will come with time, but he is doing damage over time. And then once this hits 0, then we could put in a line of code that says you win or whatever. And then it loads the next scene. Okay, speaking of scenes, before we go any further, save your work. Go up to File, go to Save As, and it will save this workspace, because Unity applications are broken up into what's known as scenes. A scene can be used for a lot of purposes. If you think of like an old school side-scrolling level, one level would be a scene. So you spawn, you shoot a bunch of stuff, and you beat a boss. That's the scene. If you think of something like the original, like Resident Evil, you walk through a door, the game loads, you have a few hallways or room, and then you walk through another door, and it loads. That space between doors, that area that gets loaded, that would be the scene. And there's other examples too. So like your initial menus, like your start menu, your option menus, those might all be one scene combined. So do that. Go up to File, go to Save As, save the scene, and a folder will probably appear that reads Scenes. Okay, so now we have one unit that is creating, one unit that can be spawned and is doing damage. Now it's kind of rinse and repeat. So we need to create another object. So you can do a couple things. You can create the object from scratch, because this time it's going to be the archer, and just make a few tweaks to it. You can either start from scratch, or you can duplicate what you've got and make a few tweaks to it. Let's see. I think what we're going to do is we'll just do a separate script for each unit. You could do one script that's attached to all of them, but then, like again, 6 one way, 1/2 dozen the other. You either have to have a more complex script, but less of them, or you can have more scripts, but less complexity. I don't think there's any specific impact on the performance of the application, particularly something that's not resource intensive like this. So what we're going to do, we'll just create a new one from scratch then, because there's, like I said, there's not really much to this we're going to keep. So what we do, we take our archer, we put them into the scene, we add the physics 2D, and we do the box collider 2D, and it's a trigger. We do add component. We do physics 2D. This time it is the rigid body 2D. And again, we're not going to use gravity. And then what we need to do differently is the archer is actually going to stop before they reach the castle. That's the whole point. The whole point is that they're going to stop, say, here, and they can shoot the castle from a distance. Now, we will have to change that because if the archer can shoot other enemies as well as the castle, we may have to modify that code so that it detects distance from an enemy, not just distance from the castle. But again, we can work on that. Some units only attack buildings, whereas some units attack other units as well. Same thing for the soldier. I didn't mention that in the last video, but right now the soldier stops when it collides with the castle. We can also have it stop when it collides with an enemy soldier, but we can't code that until we have our enemy soldiers. So again, it's an iterative process. You put the basic code into place and then you build on it. Okay, so let's create the script. So just as we have our melee script, we're going to need an archer script. So create C#, and we'll call this archer con. We click on our archer and we will put archer con on that object. So now that is a component. Again, game balance. In the other one, we gave it a fairly fast speed, although we really sped up its speed just so it wasn't so tedious for troubleshooting. But even still, I suspect the archers would travel slower because you don't want them to be out front. So we're just going to copy and paste this, partially because I'm lazy and partially to reinforce the fact that it's really not new functionality. You've already seen this. You've already seen how to access a rigid body 2D and to change the velocity and to have it move only on the x-axis. Nothing new here. Now what we need to do is we need it to stop short of the castle. So what we can do, we go back to our scene, and what we can do is we can create an object here that has no visual appearance but has a collider. So we're going to go to game object and we'll do create empty and we'll call this stop point. And again, this is game balance. Where do you want the archer to be able to shoot from? Do you want them to be able to shoot from a few steps away? Purely game balance. And maybe you're going to have 2 or 3 different types of archers, and they have different ranges. And like I said, the catapult will probably stay way back here. So what we'll do is for our stop point, we'll do add component, physics 2D, box collider. There's the box collider. Now this one, again, it will be a trigger, but this one we're going to make narrow. We don't need it to be really wide because it's really the leftmost edge that matters because that's what gets collided with. So where the leftmost edge is, that's when the archer stops. Okay? And so what's going to happen is we need them to check for this point. So we're going to create another tag. So tag, add tag, plus, and we'll call this archer stop. We save it. And again, you have to go back to the object and you have to now select the tag. So let's also rename this. Get rid of the 1. So we go back to our script, and what we do is it's going to be very similar. So for the melee con, we said that when it collides with the castle, start attacking. So it's going to be very similar, but in this case, it's going to check to see if it's collided with the stopping point, and its attack will actually have to shoot an arrow, and then the arrow will then have to detect a collision. So it's similar, but you're building on it. You're making a more complex cycle, a more complex sequence. So we go back to ArcherCon and we say, I'm just going to copy and paste this. Again, partly out of laziness and partly out of the rationale that we've already seen this. This is not new functionality. So we're just going to change, was it Archer stop? Let's go Archer stop, okay? So if it reaches Archer stop, then we want it to do something. Its velocity is also going to reach 0, but let's give this a different name. We'll call this range attack. So similarly, IE numerator, range attack rate. Typically, you don't do that. Typically, you create the IE numerator coroutine first. And again, yield, return, new, wait 4 seconds. This is once again a game balance issue. So should the archers fire faster? Should they fire slower? Should they fire slower because they can shoot from a distance and therefore they can hit their target? They can begin attacking their target sooner. That's all game balance, and that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to tell you what the balance of the game should be. So we'll again just say 1 second. But at this point, rather than automatically doing damage, it will instead instantiate an arrow, and the arrow then will do damage. So like I said, we're kind of looking at the melee routine and then making it more complicated. So let's test that. We just want, actually, we can't really test it. Yeah, I think this will give it problems, the fact it doesn't do anything after the yield. So what we need to do is we create our arrow. So we take our arrow image, put it in the scene, and we will add the physics 2D. So again, we're doing box collider. Not a great look for the arrow. It's hard to see on the gray background because it's like a light brown and it's kind of tiny. So we give it its box collider. We give it its rigid body. So again, you should see these patterns, things we've already done. Rigid body 2D, that is, to be specific. We don't want to use gravity. It's possible we could use gravity in the long run because say they shoot up into the air and then it comes down, we might find that gravity does the work for us, but we'll get to that. So for the moment, we won't use gravity and we're just going to have them shoot straight. So the arrow has its rigid body for collision. It has the box collider for collision, the rigid body for velocity. We now need it to move. So right click, create, C#. We'll call this arrow con. Our arrow object gets arrow con. And then for arrow con, going to see some very similar coding here. So it also gets the rigid body 2D. This is going to shoot fast though, so let's make it like 4-0. It just wouldn't look right if it's a slow arrow. And also, again, the idea of speed and distance. So when the arrow is instantiated, because remember, the script is attached to the arrow, not the archer, it will shoot at a +4 along the x-axis. Then it too needs to detect a collision. So actually, we'll go to MeleeCon and this one's a little bit different because the arrow itself doesn't need the IE numerator. It just needs to detect the collision. and it will also be enemy castle. So the arrow will detect a collision with the enemy castle. Again, we might eventually have to add it to detect collision with an enemy soldier. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of this because really there's only two things we're doing. We're going to reference the variable for enemy castle HP, and we'll do 5 as well. Again, game balance, whatever number you want. But now the arrow gets destroyed. So destroy game object does just that. It destroys the object that this script is attached to. And it's happening when it collides with an object that has the tag enemy castle. So now, if I have not done anything, actually, we have to do a couple more things. I was getting ready to fire the arrow, then I realized that we haven't actually referenced the arrow yet. So the arrow, we can drag it down here to turn it into a prefab. We also haven't turned the archer into a prefab either, so let's go ahead and turn the archer into a prefab. And now the archer has to be made aware of that arrow. So we go back to ArcherCon, and we do public transform, and it will be arrow obj. Sometimes I like to put the suffix obj on to variable names when I know that it's an object. So when I see this pop up in a list, I say, okay, that's a game object. So again, we're in the archer script. The archer hits the stopping point and then does ranged attack coroutine. The ranged attack coroutine says wait 1 second and then do something. What is it going to do? It's going to instantiate. So we've already seen the instantiate command before. This time we're going to instantiate the arrow object, but it's going to look a little bit different. This time we're not going to use the arrow's location. We're going to use the archer's location because we need it to be relative to the archer. So archer, transform.position. So transform.position is the position of the object the script is attached to. The script is attached to the archer. So transfer the arrow object, but at the position of the archer, but with the rotation of the arrow. So arrow object dot rotation. And then we simply have to go to our archer object, and we need to attach, see here's arrow object. We need to take that arrow object and put it there. And now, if I haven't forgotten anything, can the button actually instantiate it yet? No. So I don't have the arrow button. We have the melee button. We don't have the arrow button. Okay, so right click, create C# archer BUT. So I'm trying to keep some naming conventions here. So for the melee button, it's melee butt and then archer butt. I suppose you could switch it up so the word button is first. That way all your button scripts are together. Again, that's subjective, whatever works best for you. So we'll take the archer button. We open that up. Again, we get rid of the remark statements. And again, we have to make a reference to the object that we want instantiated. So public transform, and it will be archer, again, obj, since it's an object that's being instantiated. So public transform archer object. And let's go to our melee button. See, I didn't do that with the melee soldier. I should have mentioned that. But again, it's subjective. You don't have to do that. I would just copy and paste this, but we have to change most of it. But again, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do the mouse down. So for our archer button, so on mouse down, we're going to instantiate archer OBJ. And we're going to instantiate at the archer's position and the archer's rotation. So clicking on the button instantiates the archer. When the archer collides with the stopping point, it will then shoot the arrow, and that reminds me I need to double check to make sure it keeps shooting or if it only shoots once. So now we have to actually drag and drop the archer object. So we click on our archer button. There's the archer object. We take our archer, we do that, and now we're almost done with the archer. So now I just have to check the archer con. So yeah, this would have only shot one button. So this is the archer script. The archer collides with the archer stop. The coroutine says fire the arrow, but it doesn't fire it again. I need to do the same thing that I did with the other one and make this auto recursive. So just take this here. So in other words, you want it to keep attacking. You don't want it to attack just once. Now, if I haven't forgotten anything, that should finally do it. If I did forget anything, I will probably lie and edit the video and say that I did it. Now, we did a lot, so we definitely want to review if there's any mistakes. So we click on our archer button. He appears. He should stop somewhere around here. And he shoots the arrow. And he keeps shooting the arrow. It's colliding with the castle. And because remember, the collider box is actually out here. So what we can do, there's a couple things. We can have it not destroy immediately. So the collision is still occurring. We're just kind of faking it. The other thing is let's make sure that the subtraction is working. So what we do, the arrow, let's do that first. So the arrow says if a collision occurs, destroy. Well, what you can do is this. You can create a delay. So let's say half a second delay. And if you use the decimal, you need the letter F, or else it gets confused. So the collision is still occurring, and the health is still being reduced, the HP is being reduced, but the actual destruction happens half a second later. So functionally, it's happening at the same time as far as the collision. We're just not clearing this off the screen until a little bit longer. And we said that we also want that to be displayed on the screen. So after that, we'll do debug.log, and we will again put in gameflow.enemy castle HP. And I think that will be just about it for this, because now we've added a second character that can be summoned, and it has a very different type of attack. So we click on him. See? Timing works out just right. Disappears when it hits the front of the castle, and indeed down here the castle is taking damage. So again, it's not much to look at, but again, don't get distracted by the visuals. You want the functionality to work, and then you can go back and add the final graphics. In fact, I might even do that for the final video, show you just how easy it is to swap in. Like for instance, for the castle, all this can stay the same. You just have to swap out the sprite. You might have to tweak the collider, that kind of thing, but it's not a big deal. And again, if you're putting your placeholder graphics, if you're drawing them within the same general parameters as far as size and shape as your final graphics, you're good. like these we can replace with things that look more like cards, that kind of thing. That way they have a standard size. Okay, so I think that's it for this video. I again hope that this has been helpful. If there's a specific functionality you want to see, please leave a comment and let me know. And I think that's about it. And please enjoy the rest of your day.